Hi everyone, and welcome to Korchik's class. Today, we're going to be looking at the idea of the imposition of liberalism, or the desire for some liberal states to spread liberal ideology. And it's been a pretty major global force in the 20th and 21st centuries. We've seen it here in Canada through the imposition of liberalism on Indigenous peoples, for example, and the resulting trauma that still very much haunts those communities. So imposition of liberalism can be a pretty difficult, pretty negative thing sometimes. It's also been a focus of liberal democracies internationally, and it happens for a few different reasons. One is this idea of the democratic peace theory, which says that countries that are liberal democracies, well, they rarely go to war with one another, in part because of common ideology or economic free trade connections that are made between liberal democracies. So it's been a drive to try and make more countries out there liberal democracies. It also partly comes from a belief in human rights, where some countries are notoriously bad at upholding human rights in their parts of the world, and so the big liberal democracies feel it's their right to go in there and fix things, and the United States has taken a role in that in the last 100 years or so. But it's a tough proposition, because when we think about liberal democracies, very often they're born from conflict, right? If we think about some of the original liberal democracies, like the United States, that came after the American Revolution, right? Pretty big conflict. If you think about France, well, the French Revolution, right? A lot of blood, a lot of heads getting chopped off in that revolution. So it's a tough thing to do. And the term itself, like if you think about it, it's paradoxical, right? Imposing liberalism. So liberalism is meant to be all about freedom, but you're imposing it. So you're forcing other people to take your freedom and to take your principles of liberalism, even though they might not necessarily want them. Internationally, it's also been attempted several times, and in some cases it's worked better than others. If we think about Germany after the First World War, well, there was an attempt to impose liberalism there through the Treaty of Versailles, and lots of different methods were created in order to build this revolutionary new democracy in Germany, but, well, we know how that turned out, right? Failed pretty spectacularly. After World War II, a similar process tried to make Germany again, and this time also Japan, into liberal democracies. And again, led by the United States, they tried to learn from some of the mistakes of the Treaty of Versailles and try to make it a little bit more successful. So the change wasn't too radical, and there had already at that point been some experience with liberal democracy already in Japan. To ensure there was some continuity along with the new changes, the Emperor of Japan remained as the head of state in Japan, albeit basically symbolically by this point. And in both cases, the occupation forces stayed for a much longer time and were more heavily involved in the rebuild. So the United States played a very key role in rebuilding Japan, and the United States, Britain, and France maintained a very key role in rebuilding West Germany in this case. Some more recent examples of the imposition of liberalism, again, were not very successful. And under President George W. Bush, the United States foreign policy really revolved around this idea of nation building and spreading liberal democracy to parts of the world that were dictatorships or had governments that were unfriendly to the United States. And so one big example of that was the war in Afghanistan. After the 9/11 bombings of the Twin Towers in New York City, Afghanistan was invaded by the United States as an attempt to overthrow the regime of the Taliban and install a more US-friendly democracy in its place. That war is still going on, right? So that example, not particularly successful. Neither has the example in Iraq been tremendously successful. And the United States wanted to depose dictator Saddam Hussein and create this new democracy in Iraq. And well, there continues to be huge sectarian violence outbursts in Iraq over and over and over again. And the rise of ISIS also has shown us that, well, that process hasn't been entirely successful. And that begs some really big questions about where we're going with imposing liberalism on different parts of the world. Is liberalism even always the answer? Or, are different ideologies and different systems of thought and belief just as valid as liberalism? And can you even make a country a liberal democracy to begin with? Or do the people there actually have to want it and have to go through that whole process themselves? And if you do try to impose liberalism, will that conflict be inevitable? Or will any attempt to bring something to people who might not necessarily want it breed more resistance and more conflict? Because as we've seen in Iraq, for example, a lot of people in Iraq just saw the United States as an occupying force. Not that they were trying to help out, but that they were taking away the freedom of Iraqis to have whichever kind of government they wanted. And is democratic peace as a whole even a justifiable concept, or is it just another ethnocentric idea that maybe doesn't take into account the beliefs of others? Right? So these are the big questions that we'll leave off this video with, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time.